Hello, this is Carl Irwin with episode 7 of Hacking the Viewport. It's a series that I've been putting out that is looking at rendering production-ready type render output directly from the viewport and using various hacks and workarounds in order to get quality, as close to high-quality results as we can from the viewport in an effort to decrease the amount of time that is put into final render. We have completed a project for the most part. We've looked at all of the different parts of a space scene with a kind of a planetary sort of object in an asteroid field and nebula and star field and lens flare and all that kind of stuff in it. We're going to move on now in the series and look at some other slightly more advanced techniques. Now, I'm going to assume that you've seen most of the previous episodes, if not all of them, and I'm not going to touch on any of the elements or tricks or hacks that were used in any of those previous episodes. I'm going to rely on you to kind of do that investigation yourself. So if there's anything in here that doesn't quite make sense, I would invite you to look back. And as I go through this, I'll try to refer back to previous episodes that may address some of the things that I kind of gloss over very quickly. We're going to look at this scene here, so you can see it's my beautiful face, a face meant for radio, sitting in a vehicle, driving along. You can see the scene kind of playing out here. And what this is actually an application of color keying or green screen. We're going to look at how to do this directly from the viewport. Yes, you can do this directly from the viewport using the material and the texture node setup. There's a way to do color keying. It's not a perfect solution to color keying. There are much better ways to do it, particularly through Blender's internal compositor or even in the video sequence editor. There are ways to do color keying that are just a little bit easier, but those ways take a little bit more time to render. We're going to kind of do a hack job on this in the viewport and attempt to color key some footage to put a scene like this together. So let me just explain what is color keyed and what is not. This environment here is made up of two-dimensional images. There's the car, vehicle interior. There is the landscape that's moving by in the background, which is another element. The window is a different element. The parts that make up kind of the elements that are on the window are separate. Then there is some of the shadow effects in here to composite all of this together. The depth of field that's generated, you can see that there's kind of a shallow depth of field on the person here and on the seat. And then it kind of blurs out. That's all generated using external image editors, which is a very easy thing to do inside of Blender. I've talked a little bit about that in previous episodes. I believe episode 2 and 3 we talked about that a little bit. There's also some lens kind of lens grit kind of elements here, some flare elements, a little bit of light wrapping going on. That's a separate element as well. So that's everything that's kind of in this scene, and then there's a little bit of a camera move, which we'll discuss a little bit, some camera animation, which I've actually talked about in some previous episodes. So let's get into it and see exactly how this is put together. So you may not believe me, and I'll prove it to you here. This is the actual viewport view, and if I go back to the beginning, you'll see that this is going to play a little bit slow because there's quite a bit of, some of this has been cached, so it'll play a little bit quick at the beginning, and you can see it takes it one frame at a time, probably about 2 or 3 frames per second, which is still a pretty good preview speed, and you can really see how it fits together frame to frame. One of the most obnoxious things, I think, in using the compositor inside of Blender and other compositors that run at a limited speed is that you can get a really good look at how a single frame gets composited together. However, you don't see the sum of all frames in the video, and to see how that previews. Not very well anyway. You can kind of click through and let it render. If you have everything pre-rendered inside of the compositor, it will render fairly quickly, but you don't really see frame to frame to frame to frame to find any of the flaws that may be in there. And one of the most nagging things I find in using the internal compositor is that you'll render out a video only to find that the video frame-to-frame compositing, it just doesn't work. There are discrepancies and artifacts, things that show up, particularly when you're using lots and lots of filters. So by doing it in the viewport, we can preview much more easily, and we can see the issues that arise and either fix them or find a way to work around them. So as you can see the scene playing out, we're almost to the end of the sequence here, you can see that in the color keying, there's a little bit of issue, particularly with some of this hair up here. This more of the fuzzy. I've got a receding hairline here, and the hair's a little bit shorter, kind of fuzzy in the front. And the way that this is lifted off of the key is not quite as clean as, say, some of the more stark edges around the body, around the shirt, around the face. Even some of these parts around the glasses are a lot cleaner than what we're seeing up here. So I can see this more readily on preview using the viewport. If I was doing this in the internal compositor, I would find that I would not notice this discrepancy. Each frame would independently look really, really good, and I wouldn't recognize the problem until after I've spent many minutes, up to an hour, because you'd be compositing, probably with all the filters that are applied here, you'd be compositing at maybe a minute per frame, even with a moderate to fast computer. By doing it in the viewport, just with the speed of OpenGL and GLSL, and even the node setups through that engine, you can see that the playback is much quicker. So that's a benefit to using this. Now, some of the downsides. Let me go over the downsides before I show you how this is accomplished and the assets that are part of this. The downside to doing this is that you are missing some functions that are available in some higher-end color key software and color key nodes and presets that are available inside of the internal compositor or in some other compositor. For example, in the node setup, we're not able to choke our matte, meaning that we can't go into negative space or positive space on the matte and choke the black and white. We're not able to do that very well. Now, there's a workaround, a hack for that I'm going to talk about, but it requires kind of a lengthy extra step where you need to pre-render some footage. That's one downside to using this. However, the upside is that we can actually separate color channels very easily using some unorthodox methods to contemporary software, but not so unorthodox methods when you consider the process that was used in photochemical green or blue screen chroma key separation. And what I mean by that is that if you consider how this process used to be done in the photochemical era, that is the era of film production prior to computer compositing capability, they would shoot their footage much like we would today on a green or a blue screen, some kind of off color that is not represented in the subjects. And then they would apply some various photographical filters to separate those colors, that background color, from the foreground images. And they would generate from that what's called a matte. And if you don't know by now from our previous episodes or from other tutorials or other education that you may have received, a matte is merely a black and white image, where white represents that which should be opaque, or should be seen, and black represents that which should be alpha transparent or unseen. So our goal here, and really your goal in any kind of color keying, is to generate a matte. Now that's where, I'm going to stop this for a second, that's where a lot of individuals run into problems when using color keying applications or add-ons in various compositors, is that they're trying to use maybe some of the more quick and dirty avenues by simply keying out the color and hoping for the best on the subject, and finding that parts become opaque or transparent because they involve a little bit of the hue or saturation or some of the nuance of that background color, or they run into problems because there is some color spill and they're not able to work around that using the more quick and dirty methods. And that is because you're not using a matte, a true matte. You're not focusing on generating a clean matte to use as the application of your keying, meaning the separation of your background and your foreground assets. And it is better to generate a black and white matte than it is to do the quick and dirty routes using just the color keying. And we're able to do that inside of Blender. So without further discussion, let me show you exactly what goes into this. I'll show you kind of the setup. We'll turn off the only render here for a second. I'm using 2.72. There should be 2.73 should be coming out, if it isn't out already, very, very soon. You can see all of the assets that are in here. These are two-dimensional assets. I even have a couple of two-dimensional assets on the camera, parented to the camera, a vignette, and also, if you're looking in there very closely, there is a little bit of a lens grit asset in there, just to kind of sell the effect a little bit more of a camera in three-dimensional space. You can see in here that I have a couple of layers. There is a steering wheel and a front edge of the seat layer and a console layer here. And this is one image where these parts have been separated. They've been cut out using a photo editor. I use GIMP. So I masked those out, and some people might complain and say, well, too bad you can't do that right inside of Blender. Well, who cares? Because you can go directly to any photo editor that you want directly from Blender. So it actually is a pretty seamless operation to do that. And, that's, if you really want high-powered separation and tools for two-dimensional images, you're way better off switching over to a photo editor from any compositor, not just from Blender's compositor or from the 3D viewport. So that's my 2 cents on that. So I separated out these objects very quickly using some of the masking tools in GIMP. Then I have the green screen image itself, which is myself on a green screen that is sandwiched in between this foreground image and then the background image, which is the rest of the vehicle, or rather all of the vehicle set in the background. And this has applied to it just a few, maybe 5-pixel Gaussian blur on both X and Y to generate a little bit of the depth of field. And then this foreground image of the chair, the seat, and the steering wheel and console is completely sharp, as is the green screen footage is completely sharp with no blur applied. In the background, I have this kind of panoramic vista. It's been stretched on the z-axis and then tilted back on X rotation, and this has a couple of blurs applied to it. There's an X blur, about 50 pixels blur, and then just a few pixels blur on the Y, and that is to simulate the idea of motion blur, because this is going to be moving. We're going to just kind of help along the concept of motion blur by adding the blur to the image. And this is animated. If I go back to the beginning and we play this through, I'll just jump ahead a few places. You can see that this background image is actually moving on the x-axis to simulate motion. Right behind the vehicle, I have, this is a matte cap image of a reflected ball, and it's set to add mode using the game engine blending modes. I would refer you to episode 2 to see what I'm talking about, but we can apply via the game engine an add mode to our images here and our assets, and what it does is it leaves off just the reflective parts, the white parts that kind of imply this windshield, this window on the side there, so we get a little bit of that kind of reflection on that. There's also a little bit of a lens grit image added to that in the texture slot. In front of everything here, I've got a lens flare from my GL lens flare a pack that you can get on Blend Swap, GL lens flare pack 2. And I have this set up off camera space, if we go back to the camera view. So we're just getting a little bit of the rays coming off of this lens flare, and it helps to add the concept of atmospheric light wrap around everything inside of the scene, as if some of the light is wrapping in around everything from outside of the window. And then again, the vignette in the camera, and again, you can reference episode 2 for that, and a little bit of lens grit in there. So these are all of the assets. What we are really going to focus on, though, you can see how to composite all these things together in episode 2. Also in episode, I believe, 3 or 4, I mentioned the GLSL toolkit, which you can get. I have it referenced on those episodes. You can check on my YouTube channel and find the download for that. It has a recalculate draw order function so that we can deal with our alpha transparency. Even the green screen footage will be applied as any other alpha transparent layer and can be utilized, can be rather reformatted using utilizing the GLSL toolkit or recalculate draw order function. So that is all I'm doing. Everything that I have done here with respect to compositing you can find in the very first episodes of the series, except for this green screen situation here. So let me show you what's going on with the footage involved in this. The footage is this footage right here. Let me open up our video player. And this is my footage of me sitting in front, standing in front of a green screen. I'm actually just standing there, and it's just a green piece of cloth. It's actually quite wrinkly. It's not really a good matte. Now, if you're doing green screen, you want to always try to have the very best, cleanest background matte that you possibly can. Although I did this kind of quick and dirty here. It does demonstrate the power of what we're going to do inside of the node setup in the viewport, that I was able to key this off pretty painlessly. And I was able to separate this off even though there's a lot of shadow and light and contrast on my green background. This is a shot using the CineStyle preset. I have a Canon camera, and I'm using the CineStyle preset, so it's very, very flat. Very, very flat contrast, very flat color. However, there is a great deal of information inside of the frame, shot in full HD, 24 frames per second, using the CineStyle preset. Now, I did have my ISO setting a little bit high. My ISO setting was a little bit big, so there's a lot of interference, I guess, a little bit of pixelization going on in there that is undesirable, and that gets in the way of our green keying later on, our color keying. Ideally, you want to have an ISO set very low, have it very well lit. You want to have a nice clean background, have good color separation on the subject, make sure the background is lit very carefully, and have very good backlighting and light separation on your subjects. I've done none of those things, and I still was able to get the result that I got. So if you do this very carefully and you take time with your screen setup, you can actually get, I think, even much, much better results than what I did. And my results, I think, are pretty acceptable. So anyway, this is the background image. Now, what I did is I ran this one time through the VSE, and I made another version of it. And I applied the new Gaussian blur function by about 5 pixels on X and Y, and I made this version, which is exactly the same thing, but it has this blurred effect. And the reason why I did this is I'm going to use this video as my actual matte for color separation. What this does by adding this blur is it gets rid of some of that noise that's in there from having a high ISO setting, and it actually will help a little bit with some of the separation around the subject and the background. With some of the clamping that we can do once we get our matte set. We'll be able to actually bring my matte into the negative or push it out into the positive using some color ramps or some contrast nodes. So by doing this, I save myself a little bit of trouble. Now this is one extra step. Rest assured that rendering this out, though, took only a minute or two because, you know, adding one effect, a Gaussian blur on the X, Gaussian blur on Y for a few pixels, that renders out pretty quick directly from the video sequence editor. It's well worth it to give myself one extra asset to do my color separation. You don't have to do this. In fact, if you do all of the other things that I mentioned in your recording, concerning clean background, color separation, good lighting, low ISO, good camera settings, all of that stuff, then you will probably not have to do something like this. You'll probably be able to key very, very cleanly. Also, I just want to point out that this key is involving some pretty tricky things, like the hair I mentioned up here, which ultimately I wasn't really able to deal with very well, at least on this patch of hair right up here. But the glasses I was able to deal with very well, and I think it came off pretty well. The idea with glasses is that you're going to see your background color in the refraction of the glass, and you actually want that to be cut out. You will get a little bit of color spill, and we'll talk about how to deal with that in the tutorial a little bit. But you want to actually let that get keyed out, and you're going to want the background image to show through as if you're seeing the background image being refracted. And what you want to have, however, is any part in there that is refracting part of the subject or casting some shadow or some of these edges and rims, some of the color difference that's in there. You want to make sure you retain that in your color key. Okay, so let's get into it and see what's going on here. You can see some of these other images just to see what I've done. This is the steering wheel and seat separated. You can see how I separated that out. And this is very, very sharp, this image. Here's the, let me go back here, find the car. This is the vehicle background, and you can see it's got a couple of pixel blur on it to add a little bit, force a little bit of a depth of field action on it. Let's see, what else do I have in here? Here's my background vista, and you can see the blur that's been applied to about a 50 pixel blur on the x-axis to give that motion blur, kind of forced motion blur in there. You wouldn't have to do that. You could do a little bit of frame interpolation later on to get motion blur, but this might save you from having to do that. And I think that's it. Those are all of the assets that are in there, plus the green screen. Okay. All right, let's take a look at the project. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select. We're not going to talk about how to order everything. You can view that in episode 2 and 3, where I discuss how to composite two-dimensional images together. I also talk a little bit about camera animation. What I've done here is I have my camera animated to rotate on X, Y, and Z, and it just bumps around a little bit to give us a little bit of that bumpy feeling inside of the vehicle. So as long as the camera is stationary and it's rotating only in terms of animation, you can make two-dimensional composites look very, very three-dimensional. If you have the camera moving on X, Y, or Z, you'll start to see everything break apart, just as you can see here as I move the viewport around, move around in the viewport. Okay, let's look at the green screen. I'm going to click on the green screen subject. You see it disappears, and oh, one other thing in here, you can see I have some shadow. What I did is I composited in just some object primitives. This is just a circle. And actually, it's a soft white to black gradient circle that I took from my lens flare kit, and I used it as multiply, and it multiplies a black color to create kind of the shadow. And I just put a few of these in here. I put one right behind the head of the subject. I put one large one stretched out on one axis behind the body to cast a shadow on the seat, and then I put another one in front of the body to cast a shadow from the rim of the chair onto the subject, onto the person. So just using some object primitives, you can generate some shadows without having to, draw a bunch of masks and, render out masks and that kind of stuff. Just using object primitives, primitive objects, circles and squares and things like that, and gradients, you can get away with a lot of interesting compositing tricks here. So I've added some shadow doing that. Sorry, forgot to mention that. All right, let's click on the green screen subject here, and I will move back to the node editor, and you'll see how this node setup works. I'm going to turn off some of these objects just so we can see what the green screen subject looks like as I turn off different elements. And we'll kill everything and we'll go to the camera view. And I'll turn on only render. I have this subdivided. I don't think that really... Oh, I know why. Here's why. I subdivided this because you can see on the original, my green screen did not cover everything. Now, normally you would create what's called a garbage matte. And you could do that. I could have taken out one image of this video and then in a photo editor just created a garbage matte to add on to it to cut out any sections that I didn't need. But it's actually easier because we're using planes to just subdivide and then delete the vertices that involve any sections that we don't need. And essentially we're just cutting out via a garbage matte, cutting out anything that's not necessary. I could have gone a little bit deeper with this if I wanted to, but there wasn't any need to. So once you have your plane in here and everything is UV mapped, which it will automatically be when you import the image as a plane and set your video length, you can subdivide it from there and just delete vertices, and it will maintain the original UV mapping. So a little bit of a trick for you there. So I subdivided, delete the vertices you don't need. It will cut out as a garbage matte anything that you don't need. All right, let me click on only render so we can see what's going on here. This is the final output. Let me cut out different nodes here so you can see what's going on. Now this looks like a pretty complex setup, and it is a little complex. Give me a second here for a quick drink. It is a complex setup, but it's actually probably the simplest setup that you would need to do in any kind of color keying. What we are after is this image right here. I'm going to take off of our final output, and I'm going to show you what the matte looks like. Ultimately, in any kind of color mapping or green screen, blue screen, chroma keying, this is what you're after. You want a white area to represent the part that you want to keep, and a black area to represent the part you want to lose. This is really what is going on in the back end of any kind of color keying software. This is what you're after. You're not really separating a color directly. You are actually creating this image. So with that in mind, we're going to find a way to generate this image using only the nodes that we have available to us inside of the GLSL node editor here. Okay, so that's what we're after. So let me show you what we're going to start with. The first thing we're going to start with is going to be actually our blurred version of the green screen footage. So you can see this is blurred about 5 pixels. Okay, if I had the original image on there, it would look like this. This is the final output for the subject, which is nice and sharp and clean. And you see I have both of these in here as separate materials. So what I've done in my material is I have added both of these materials. I called the blurred one the matte layer, and the other one is called the green screen. And this one is the one that has the nodes applied to it, and then I just bring in an input node with this matte layer material on it, and that's the one that I use to generate my matte from. Okay, so the first thing that I did is I brought my matte layer into a saturation, hue and saturation node, and I bumped the saturation up to 2. Okay, so I doubled my saturation. This is a very important step in color keying, to increase your saturation, because this again is shot in a CineStyle preset on the camera, which retains all of my data. And because it retains all of my data, I can boost my saturation a lot to separate my color. And you can see this is really super, super ugly. Okay. By the way, you can apply what I'm doing here to any compositor in green screen. So this is not just a lesson in green screen techniques in GLSL. This is really a lesson in any kind of compositing. Okay, just keep that in mind. So I've applied a saturation filter, and I boosted my saturation to really separate the green from everything else. Okay, so once I've done that, I can work a little bit better here. So the next thing I did is I took it to a separate RGB node, and you can find that in the nodes under, add color node, or rather converter. There is a separate RGB, and what it does is it separates out the red, the green, and the blue channel into different grayscale kind of representation. So for example, if I click on the top one up here, which I believe is the red, this is what the red channel would look like. Okay, and you can see that the things that are green and blue appear kind of darker, and anything that has a red value in it appears more light colored. Okay, let's see here. The next one would be the G, the green, which is the one we're most interested in to start with. So if I click here and grab the green channel, drop it over here to the end, you can see the green. You can see how this saturation node really helps us. Everything that is green looks really, really light, and the things that don't have green in them or have less green in them look more dark. Okay. Now we have a problem because look, the white. This is an issue. Anything that is white has all colors in it. Okay, white light contains all color, are red, green, and blue. So we're going to have to find a way to separate the white from the green. But you see, it does give us a green separation here. It turns the green a lighter color. Okay, then on the blue channel, you'll see that the blues will appear a little bit lighter. And then everything that is green and red-ish will turn darker. So you see the green gets really dark here on this one, and things that contain, parts that contain some blue hue in it will look a little bit more lighter. Okay, and you can see the white is really white in all three of these things. Okay, so we have a separation using this node of red, green, and blue. I'm going to take, first, before I mess with my green channel, I want to deal with this white issue. I'm going to take my red and my blue, and I'm going to bring them up to an add node, and I'm going to add them together. So what it's going to do is it's going to take the parts that have the white represented in them, and the red and the blue, and it's going to add those together to make a really bright white matte for things that are white and things that have both red and blue in them. Okay, and this will look like this. If I grab onto the output of this node, so I'm taking my red and blue, adding them together, and you can see that now I've separated my light colors here out, anything that's white, and the things that are green and just green are darker in the background. Okay, a little bit more gray. Now this gray looks a lot like that gray. That's okay. I'm going to deal with the green separately. What I want to do is I want to identify the light colors right here. I want to identify things that are lighter colored, that have a little bit of green in them, and also have blue and red because it's white. Okay, and so I've got that now, and I'm going to at the same time take my green channel, and I'm going to bring that to a color ramp. And I'm going to boost my white color. I'm going to bring the whites way down here and increase my contrast quite a bit. And the green channel with this color ramp set on it looks something like this. So here's my green channel. So you see my green becomes really light now, and everything else is starting to darken up a little bit more. But you see my whites are really, really bright because things that are white on the green channel are also white on the blue and the red channel, because white has all three colors in it. Okay, so I'm separating my green, but I have a problem with the whites. Well, that's okay, because up here I'm separating my whites with the blue and red add node that I just created. So I'm going to also pipe that through a color ramp. You can again find the color ramp on the converter add menu. So this is the node color ramp right here. Okay, it by default gives you black and white. You can change these colors to anything, and you can add colors in there and continuums just like you would in the compositor. If you'll see here, my blue and my red added together, coming out of this with my color ramp applied, will now look like this output. And what we should do is we really should separate the things that are white and the things that have the blue and red in it, like the skin tone. Okay, you see how this is starting to come together. I get some separation here. So this is my whites, and my blues, and my reds. The greens are a little bit darker in the background. Okay, lots of noise in there. That's okay. We're going to deal with that as we start to bring these two things together. Okay, and again, we're breaking down part by part what any keying software does. This is really what's going on in the back end of any keying software, but we're breaking it apart at a more intelligent level and thinking about all of these different issues one piece at a time. Okay, so I've got my color ramp on my blues and my reds with my whites standing out now. I've got my color ramp on my reds and my greens. I'm going to bring my blue and my red into a mix node as a factor. Okay, so the blue and the red output, this output right here, is going to be a factor, which means that it's going to take this white color and it's going to apply a color to something else. Okay, and the color that I am applying via mix is black. I'm adding using this, so everything that's white will now become black, and everything that's black will apply nothing. And I'm adding that to my green color ramp channel. So once again, here's my blues, reds, and whites, and here's my green. And if I take my blues, reds, and whites and use them as the add factor to add a black, I end up with this ultimate output here. So from the green channel, which has the green as white and everything else is dark, and then adding my blues, reds, and whites channel, using that as the factor to add black, I start to come up with this image, which looks pretty good. You can see I've got my subject is now dark colored. My whites are really dark because I've used that mask, that white luminance mask that I created for my blue and red channel. I've added that to my green channel to eliminate all of the white and light colors from my green channel that would have also incorporated blue and red in them. Okay, we've differentiated between colors that just have green and colors that have blue and red together. Okay, which means the light colors. And now I've got my subject, which is a dark colored image, and my background, which is a lighter colored image. Okay, so now we need to tighten up this mat a little bit, and then we will invert it so that we get white for the subject and black for the background. So from here, I take this output up to another ramp. And on this ramp, I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to bring my whites contrasted down towards my black. And that will look like this output, which is the inverted essence of what I want. See how it's inverted? It's an inversion of ultimately what I'm looking for. So I've got white in the background and black in the foreground. I want it to be the opposite. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this down to another color ramp. And on this color ramp, I took my blacks and my whites and I inverted them. I swapped places. So we bring it in and then we take the white, we move it all the way to the left, take the black, move it all the way to the right, and it will invert our mat, and it will give us something that looks like this. which is, and I also compressed it a little bit more in here. You can't really see it very well, but I compressed a little bit more so that we got rid of some of that grayish area that was in there. And now we've got a clean matte, and this is our clean final matte. It's got just a little bit of fuzz on it. You can see around the outside edges, which is good. We want a little bit of that to add a little bit of a light kind of subtle light wrapping in there, and just a little bit of softness to our matte. And where we get this from ultimately is by starting with this blurred image. Now I can show you what this looks like if I were to use the original as the output. You can see I piped my original sharp image in, and it's not quite so clean. You see all the pixelation that's occurred now around here because of all of that noise. That ISO setting was just way too high, and my lighting wasn't clean enough, and my separation of color wasn't good enough. You can see all that noise that shows up in there. So by taking that extra step of making a blurred version of it, Gaussian blurred just by a few pixels, I was able to get a much cleaner kind of matte edge on there. Okay, so that's our matte. Now what we're going to do is we're going to apply this matte output as the alpha output to this image down here. Okay, so I'm just going to take my sharp image, and I'm going to put my sharp image in the image output, and I'm going to take my color matte. Let me get this out of the way, see a little bit better. Take my color matte output, and I'll apply this as the alpha. Again, I have alpha transparency enabled on the material, and we get this, which looks really good, except you see the color spill. Now this is another problem that you deal with when doing color keying, is that ultimately you will pick up a little bit of that background color on the subject, unless you have really, really good light separation, which I did not. If you do have really good light separation, you can avoid a lot of this. Another reason why you want to make sure your setup is really good to start with, and your footage is clean. But I did not have good light separation, so I'm getting a little bit of a green hue in here. We need to get rid of that. Now, unfortunately, this node system here in OpenGL does not have a hue saturation node input that is able to pick specific colors and drop and raise their properties, such as you can find in the video sequence editor. And also in the compositor, you can find that, but you cannot find it here. So we're going to have to get creative to isolate this green color. So what I did was I went to my saturation output, my doubled saturation that I used for my matte, and I brought that down to another RGB output. And I took my a green output into a subtract node as color 1. Okay, so this is a mix subtract node as color 1. And then I took the red and the blue, and I brought that down to an add node as color 2. Okay, so I'm kind of doing the same thing that I did before, where I'm getting rid of the blues and the reds, and I'm subtracting them out of the green. And the output that I get from that looks like this. Let me see here if I can show you what's happening. Get my matte off of there. So the output of that looks like this, which is kind of a really quick version of what I did before, where I'm isolating out my colors a little bit. So again, let me show you what's going on. I have my green going into color 1, and I'm subtracting color 2 from it. Okay, so I'm subtracting the reds and the blues from the green. And what I'm trying to do is I'm really trying to isolate the green channel. I don't want any blue or red in it. I just want to know, where is green influencing all of my color in here? Okay, where is green influencing? So you see, green is influencing my whites. It's not influencing the reds. It's influencing the background, which would also influence the color spill you see on the edges here. It's not influencing the shadows so much all over here, but you see the parts where green is in there. Okay, and I end up with this output, and then I bring this output down to an RGB curve. Okay, and what I did is I increased the contrast to really bring out the parts that have the most amount of green affecting it, and that looks like this. So you see this is the contrasted version. So the parts that are lighter colored have more green in them than the parts that are dark or black. Okay? And then I use this as a factor in a mixed node. And then what I did is I chose a color that's on the opposite side of the color spectrum from my spilled color, which is a very faint green. So you see the color that would be on the... Oops, actually I just changed my color. That was a mistake. You see here that the green would be about here, my color spill green. So I went to kind of the opposite side, which would be a pink. Okay, pinky kind of color. And I'm using this as the color, and I'm using my output contrast as the factor to add this color to my image. So anywhere that I found those greens, particularly on the background, it will rather mix this pink color on top to kind of negate that green color. Okay, and this is what I end up with. So you see that the green starts to look kind of a neutral color. It almost looks like kind of a whitish color. The really green stuff is pink because it's adding a lot. But as there's not a lot of green in here, that color spill that I had is starting to disappear. It's been replaced with this pinky kind of overlay, which is neutralizing the green and making it a little bit more of a dull white or gray color. Okay, so this is the after, and this is the before. So before and after. So you see what's happened there. Now you really can see it a lot better if I put the matte on it. So let me bring my matte output down. My alpha matte, and again, this is the before. See that green in there? I want to get that a neutral gray color, so I'm going to put a contrasting color on there. Here is my after, and you can see how we neutralize that out, okay, by using that. And it doesn't really affect anything else. It just affects those places because I have a high contrast set on it. It will only affect the places where there's a color spill going on. In fact, my color did lighten up a little bit. I made an error. I moved my mouse wheel, so let me bump this down just a little bit. And that looks a little bit better, a little bit more of a neutral gray. Okay, so color spill. We can actually deal with color spill using a technique like this. There's actually lots of other ways to do this. There's a lot of ways to do any of this process. This is just kind of the quickest way I could think of to deal with all of the different parts. So when you understand what's actually happening on the back end in color keying, you can actually find more creative, maybe longer ways, but more creative ways and more specific ways to get a really perfect color key. And you can apply this again in any compositor. You don't have to just use this in the my Viewport situation here. You could apply this anywhere. Now here's my final output. If I turn everything back on, enable the render abilities, all these layers that we put in there. And again, someone might gripe and say, there's a lot of setup going on in here. Well, you know, there's a lot of setup when you're trying to get something perfect. There's a lot of setup whenever you're putting objects in a scene, too, and dealing with the color and the lighting. We're dealing with compositing here, essentially. So, anyway, this is the final output. So you could render this out, and you can see that it renders a frame at HD in a matter of a couple seconds. I have a couple of other processes running here, so it's a little bit slower. And there's our final render output that you would get. I can render out a whole video, and the video output that I end up with is this. Let me find it here, if I can. This is my initial composite, and that looks like this. So you see I'm still dealing with a little bit of the issue with the fuzziness in the hair. And again, this is a problem that originates from my footage. I didn't have very clear separation in the background. I didn't have very good lighting. If I had better backlighting on this, I could have lightened up this hair a little bit. I could have separated the color a little bit more. So that's my own fault for getting that. But ultimately, around the edges, it looks pretty good. Not too bad. So you can see my end result is really good. Now I can one-up this one more. What I did then is I took this footage into the video editor, video sequence editor, once I rendered that out. And let me open up the video sequence editor so you can see. And I did a little bit of frame interpolation to do a poor man's motion blur. And what that does, it actually will soften up a little bit of some of the motion, and it softens up a little bit of some of that noise that's in there because we're interpolating frames together. So gets rid of a little bit of that. Then on top of that, I added an adjustment layer so that I could add a 2-pixel Gaussian blur on both X and Y to soften up my full image a little bit, and that helps a little bit with some of our matte lines. And then on top of that, I added another adjustment layer, and on this adjustment layer I did a little bit of a color grading, so I added some color grading here. If I turn it off, you can see what that looks like. Underneath that, I added some noise to add a little bit of film grain in there, so I covered that on a previous episode. So one set of noise is added a very small amount, another set of noise is subtracted a very small amount. Both videos are the same thing. One is flipped on the X and Y axis, so you get a different composite of noise in there. Then on this adjustment layer, if I turn off my letterbox, on this adjustment layer I did my color grading, and I also did an offset. So I offset my frame a little bit, and I was able to offset the frame to get my letterbox to cover up a little bit of this undesirable issue up here in the hair. So I wasn't able to work my way all the way through it, so the quick way to work around it is just cover it up. So this is the final output, and then I rendered this out as my final video. And again, just to take another look at it, the final video looked something like this. Here's my final video, and so green screen. Color keying right from the Viewport. So you might want to rewind on this one and stop at a few points and take some notes to understand exactly how all of this works together, put all that together. But, you know, pretty powerful stuff there that renders very, very quickly. If you understand the setup, you can actually duplicate the setup over and over and over again pretty quickly. One suggestion I might make is to make a node setup separately, and then make a material that has a pre-green screened node setup in it that you can apply your materials to later on. If you need to do any green screening, you can just use that material as your starting point, add your textures and other materials to it, and it gives you a starting point to have your setup already put together. You can just tweak your ramps, your color ramps, and some of your contrast and your saturation to make it perfect. But anyway, that's green screening, color keying inside of the Viewport. Who knew it could be done? But yes, it can be done. And again, this is episode 7 of Hacking the Viewport. I hope you found this useful, and I wish all of you the very best in this technique, and happy blending.